Welcome back to My BrainWise Coach. I am Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And we are exploring something deeply human and surprisingly uncomfortable for most of us. What happens when we truly see ourselves? And we have a really exciting guest speaker, Ryan, who is the founder of BetterOn, an organization built around a simple but powerful idea, which I'm going to let him share and introduce himself, because we've got a really exciting episode today where we're going to dive into a little bit of the neuroscience of some of the work that is happening with clients of BetterOn. Ryan, why don't you take a couple minutes and introduce yourself to our BrainWise friends?
Thank you so much, Cole, Phil. It is an honor to be here. Hello to everybody out there listening. BetterOn is an asynchronous communications training platform that really uses video to help professionals see what their audience sees, and it encourages them and helps them develop ways to show up effectively, authentically, and really however they want to make sure that they can have an effective connection with their audience. The company's been around for about 10 years. It started working live and in person, executives and professionals using a camera as a mirror to help people see themselves. And then we quickly realized a little bit before COVID happened that as long as there is a camera, that can be used as a tool to do this work. So we built a platform to do it, which has helped us grow the business, and we're continuing to grow, and I'm very excited to be here.
That's awesome. We're so excited to have you, and I think it'll be a really phenomenal conversation because we've talked a little bit about executive presence. We've talked about confidence, self-awareness, and what the work you do with your organization and really the work that you do with individuals to help them build themselves as better professionals, as better individuals, connects to all of those things that we've been talking about. So I think this will be a great discussion that our BrainWise friends will actually be able to pick up on some cool things that they can apply in their own life as a result of some of the experiences you've had with your clients. So before we just dive in, you and Phil have known each other for quite some time, longer than I actually met you through Phil. So I would love to know, what's the connection and how did you two meet?
So the story of how Phil and I met was that I, in a previous life, had worked at YouTube, which was then bought by Google, and then moved around the country a little bit. I moved to Australia with Google and inevitably ended up in the wonderful town of Durham, North Carolina. And when I moved here, not really knowing anyone, an old friend of mine said, "Hey, we had this guy come in and do this amazing training and presentation on the brain, and he lives down by you. Can I make a connection?" And I want to give him credit. His name is Elliot Selzer. And I actually thank him often because obviously I love being in Phil's orbit. And so that's what started it, probably 2017, 2018.
Wow. Yeah, we moved here in 2017. So it would have been right at that time.
And then, I was explaining to Phil, I was like, here's what I think I'm onto. And he got it. And it means a lot when someone gets your vision.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. And it's so much fun, especially when you have mutual connections and then it creates a lifelong friendship. And Phil is certainly someone that I enjoy having in my orbit. And then he has introduced me to wonderful people such as yourself along the journey. So it's just been a lot of fun. Let's dive in. And I think what we're going to try to do today is really talk about, I don't know what ultimately the title will be. AI will help us identify what, as a result of this conversation, what our title should become. But I think it has something to do with how we show up as our authentic selves as a result of a lot of the work that you do within your organization. And one of the things, Ryan, that I think a lot of our BrainWise friends, which is what we call our listeners, enjoy about our podcast, what are the tidbits or nuggets that they can take away from our conversation? And as we're going along this journey, if there's anything that you think of that, comes to mind, feel free to throw it out there. And then Phil and I, when we debrief all of our discussion from a neuroscience perspective, we'll add on to that as a part of that conversation. Ryan, let's just start with the spark. So BetterOn began with a simple light bulb, and then suddenly you realized you were in a cavern. Take us back to that moment, and what did you first notice that made you think that there is something here?
I want to call out how much I appreciate this question, Cole, because the feeling of a cavern, that really hits. Because a cavern is quiet, there's nothing going on, but there's so much in the world that is noise. And pardon my French, and it affects why we do what we do. There's a lot of bullshit out there too. And I think that part of my spark was having had the privilege to work at quite amazing companies at quite amazing times with quite amazing people. And throughout that, in a fairly early part of my career, I just got to not just ask, who do I want to be when I grow up, when I get older, but who am I amidst all of this, all that's happening and all of the change, which hasn't changed because things are still changing 15 years later. But for me, working at YouTube gave me a very unique lens into the world. And I got to not just see a culture shift from the inside, but I got to see what happens, what's possible with a camera. Because that's what video is about. You need a camera to achieve what the platform offers. And so I became obsessed. I was one of the biggest fans of YouTube. It was just the coolest thing ever. But inevitably, when I realized that I think there's something more for me out there, I don't know what it is, but I'm not going to be able to find it unless I go find that cavern. Not that I knew that's what I was going for, but I knew that to really find it and to get really quiet, I had to leave the corporate structure, even of an amazing place like Google. So one thing I took with me was the love of YouTube, love of what it was, I think, doing for human connection in a weird way. To me, YouTube was not and still is not social media. It is not this kind of junk food necessarily of, I don't know, maybe that's a separate episode. But
Right, on doom scrolling.
I think for me, growing up as a child of the 80s, my personal love, I'm an only child, and I joke that my only sibling was MTV in the 80s. And so that was my real kind of YouTube preference when it first came out, was like 80s music videos. It just transported me. So just realizing that the bar had come down for anybody, not only to be transported, but to be able to transport others. You don't need a Hollywood studio anymore. You don't need a local TV station. You don't need that. You need a camera. So I was thinking, do I want to become a YouTuber? Is that where I'm going with this? Or is there something else out there? And spoiler alert, part of the journey was I actually did that. I did become a YouTuber for a year once I left YouTube. And spending a year making a channel, being on camera, but then also having to try and connect with an audience I could not see. That was the nucleus of this, because trying to connect to an audience you can't see, you have to rely on yourself. You have to rely on your connection to yourself. You have to rely on your imagination with how you want someone else to feel when they receive your recorded moment and when they watch you somewhere else. Basically, I could talk about this for hours, but I realized that recording yourself and watching yourself is not really what most people wake up wanting to do every day. Right. And I realized that the world of business and the professional world, video was not going away. And this is 2013 when I was doing this. And so I just learned a lot about communication, about myself, by doing this. And it was a lot of fun. You don't get there unless you're pushed. Unless you push yourself, or unless someone is like, trust me, this is going to feel really gross, but when you get on the other side of it, this is going to open a new door for you. So I took all of that and I said, maybe I could do this with professionals. Maybe I could get paid to do this. So my first client was a team of Google engineers. And I still look back, I forget who it was, but somebody was like, yeah, come in, we will pay you to do a 2-day experience with these 5 engineers who need to improve their presence. Took the hypothesis and ran with it. And I'm not going to say that it worked, but it moved the needle on their sense of self. It moved the needle on their own self-awareness and inevitably their self-confidence. And that sort of became the metric that I was like, okay, if I can create something with these very simple tools that everybody has access to, as I sit in my cavern and think, what am I working with here? If I can use confidence and awareness as the metric that we're trying to move by using a camera and video, I don't want to complicate it. I just want to leave it at that. And so 10, 12 years later, we're still trying to keep it that simple.
Which I think is amazing. Give us a little click into, for those who may not be aware of exactly what it is you're doing, heard a little bit of self-confidence or self-awareness. Obviously, there's a video component. There's probably a watching it back. If you were to give us a 3-minute elevator speech, which is a little bit longer than normal elevator pitches, 3 minutes to give us a couple clicks in so that people go, okay, now I really get what the experience would be like and how these things are coming to effect.
I think one good analogy is going to the gym, which again, not everybody likes to do it. Not everybody does it. When you start it, it's hard. But once it becomes a behavior and you feel stronger, it becomes addictive. Where it's like, oh, I really see the benefit. So for BetterOn, and anybody out there can do what we do. Just to be clear, anyone listening or watching doesn't need a coach or BetterOn or really anything else to do what we're trying to achieve. Really, the root of it is to record yourself telling the story, record yourself making a message for someone else, and record yourself actually trying, not just sitting back on your heels talking, but leaning in and realizing that camera lens is going to transport your feeling and give it to someone else, or for the sake of what we're talking about, to yourself. And that leads us to, because of this ability to play a video back, we can see ourselves. And you might say, what's different between that and when I look in the mirror every single morning? And when you look in the mirror every morning, that's your default. Could being seen necessarily, unless you're really looking closely. But I think it's a different mentality. Maybe this is something that Phil can help us with. But when you observe yourself making an effort to reach someone else, there's something that I don't have the education on, the wording for, but I've seen it happen so many times where when people do that once, the reaction is yuck, ugh, gross, no thank you. But this is where we come in. We have an amazing team of what we call guides that we've created this job out of thin air, or I have, where we're not coaches, we're not therapists, we're not trainers. We really are guiding people through the journey of accepting the feeling of seeing themselves first. Because we know it doesn't take long to get over that yuck feeling. It takes 15 minutes. And once you're over it, you're like, oh, I'm way stronger than I thought I was. And I actually have a power that's been sitting here dormant, and now I want to flex it.
I think it's absolutely fascinating because I don't know about both of you, but when we started our podcast, I was actually going back to a couple of the first episodes. I've gotten more used to seeing myself and hearing myself, but I was like, ugh, gross. I look terrible. I'm looking at it more from like a physical perspective because I've lost like 25 pounds since we started. Yay. But I had that visceral reaction. And what's fascinating is a lot of people have it. Even someone like myself, who I do public speaking, I've facilitated massive events and I have no issues with it. Seeing yourself recorded on camera, especially on a big screen TV, it just magnifies the flaws. And we all have confidence probably in ourselves in some areas, but there's also areas where there's a lack of confidence, and it just magnifies them tenfold and creates this visceral response for some of us to see ourselves. And then as time has gone on and I've seen myself more frequently, on these podcast episodes, I'm like, okay, it doesn't bother me as much. I still turn the volume down because I don't want to hear myself talk about the same thing 500 times. I certainly am able to look at it and not have that visceral response anymore.
One thing that we need to teach, explain to people when they're with us is that other people cannot see how we feel about ourselves.
Right. Exactly.
And I think, again, Phil, this is something to make a note on that maybe down the road we can look at, but I think there is a perception in a lot of people that our warts are visible to everyone, when in fact, no one cares.
Right.
And that moment for us, when we're working with professionals, no matter who they are, no matter what their end goal is, when they realize and accept no one cares, it's very freeing. But then the real work begins. Because if you want to show up and have an effect and have influence and leave a feeling with someone else, you have to put in the work to reach that person. Because not only do they not care, attention spans are so short. So you've really got to, we tell people, get over yourself quickly. Because the work, look, nobody can see what. So anyway.
Yeah. Totally. And Phil, is there anything you would like to add on or tack on to that before I think you have the next question for Ryan, actually.
I do, but just a quick response to that is, have you done any analysis or anecdotal or otherwise on people that sense of imposter syndrome in front of the camera?
Yes, it comes up organically. We definitely don't lead with it. We're not always looking for it, but something that I'm glad you bring this up, Phil. One of the most important parts of the work we do is we build in a required reflection. So we talk about people doing this record and watch and build that muscle. Everybody must record themselves reflecting on what they feel and what they notice. And so that insight gives us gold on people. And it also gives them gold on themselves, because some people are not used to reflecting on how they feel about themselves. And a lot of people are not used to doing it in front of someone they may not know that well. So it really puts us in this role that I think is just it's almost holy to me, to be honest. It's a very delicate space we don't take for granted. But all that to say is that people will bring it up themselves. If you get deep enough, they're like, man, like they feel the imposter, but they realize when they work with us, they can do something about it. They can actually try something else that doesn't feel impostery. And I was just saying about like, it only takes 15 minutes in some cases to realize you have a lot of power in you. I think we have a way of quickly opening a door for people to get over that imposter. And you're not going to be perfect, but you're going to start to feel more like yourself.
And I think we can talk a lot more about that some other time, maybe, in terms of, is somebody naturally feeling like they're an imposter, or are they feeling an imposter around a certain subject or issue? I might feel an imposter in terms of, can I get my point across? But if you want to have me tell you about how to program in Python, then I'm not an imposter. So I think there'll be some interesting debates to go back and forth around that one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things that we talked about is that there are some patterns that show up across some of the folks or individuals that you work with, Ryan. So both emotionally, physically, and relationally, when they see themselves, can you share a little bit about what those patterns are in individuals and maybe even bring it to life with, I think you were telling us a story of a chief technology officer that kind of helped this whole thing come to perspective.
Yes. I think one pattern that I see in a lot of people, and just to be clear, it's challenging for me to put words to this work because so much of the work is internal with someone I don't know. Like our clients, our participants, the work and the results are happening inside of them. And that's where we want to focus. And only sometimes do we get to hear about it or see it, but it's really their own. And I think one of the most consistent patterns I see is that they gain real confidence. Now, I didn't know when I started doing this that I'd be playing in this realm of confidence. Probably a lot of things in that market out there that people say, this will make you more confident. But it's just, there's something that we see where real humans feel more confident in who they are by doing what we ask them to do or invite them to do. So that pattern, it looks different for everyone. Confidence is not, it's not an object. It's not, here's this product that everybody, it's one size fits all. Like confidence is so personal. It's so unique and it changes. It may not be there every day, but it's this deep-seated thing that I think we try to give everyone we work with an opportunity to grow their own, no matter where they're starting from. So you may have someone, usually guys, who are like, I'm pretty good, I'm pretty confident, and maybe not. And then you have women who traditionally may be like, oh, I don't really know if you're actually amazing, and you don't have that far to go. So again, it is so specific to the individual. Was working with a woman who was a CTO at a Fortune 500 company, and she was working with me live and in person. I mentioned that we have an asynchronous training platform that anybody around the world can use. Certain executives come see me in Durham to work in my studio. And it's the same thing. We have lights, camera, action, and a really good camera and a really big screen. And we just use the space to see what we can get. And this woman, very accomplished, very confident, very bright, was ticking all the boxes and going through paces. And we usually do like 2 4-hour sessions in that program. And we try different things and we just see what we notice. And do we need to raise our voice? Do we need to work on energy and movement? All these things that just depend on the individual. And in some cases, like in her case, by the end of it, I was following her lead. She had found her style. She got it. And she's in this sweet spot of realizing I'm feeling good. I know what I'm doing. And I've got a really good camera here to record whatever I want. Which again, we are not a production company, but it's a nice byproduct of what we do that we record all the work. And it's not all perfect, but when somebody reaches that zone, they're making very strong connective video that they can use for work. They can use for LinkedIn. They can use for YouTube. We were winding down and she was like, I want to practice this. I want to practice that. And I was like, great, let's go. And we were almost done. And I think her stamina, get a little tired. I was tired. And she said, I've got one more. I was like, great. And she said, I want to do this pitch that I always do. I want to do it in Spanish, which is her native language. And I was like, great. Hit record. And so how we usually do it is we'll record a couple, we'll sit down, we'll watch, we'll reflect together, go back, do it again. So we're done for the day. And I'd put her video up on the big screen. And I was like, all right, almost done. Let's watch it. And she watched herself giving this pitch in Spanish. And I look over and she is sobbing next to me on my couch. And that doesn't surprise me. But of course, I don't understand exactly why until I ask her. And she explained that what she saw was who she really was. And she saw that doing it in her native language was who she wanted to be. And when she watched all the other videos that she recorded, she actually specifically noticed something about her eyebrows. She was like, you see in all those, me doing it this way, my eyebrows, that's not me. But it really, in that one video, brought back her story of coming to the States, going to a really good university and pushing herself to really succeed in the US, succeed in technology, and rise to this level when in her day-to-day, she also told me that she'll show up to meetings, and because she's a woman, a Latina woman, people assume she's the junior girl from marketing. And it was just this thing that I was fortunate enough to witness, that she could trust me to be there for. But it was really just her connection to herself. What happened was she received data from herself to herself that I know she could take forth and leverage in her day-to-day.
It's interesting. I think her story is extremely compelling because what an amazing opportunity that you had and she had to really understand herself and be able to grow in such a way and really connect with who she wants to be is probably what it sounds like. And at least in my kind of interpretation. And one of the things that I think, in addition to confidence, is you are solving a challenge that is, I think for a lot of people, is how do I become self-aware of how I'm showing up? We talk about this a lot on our podcast. And a lot of times the first hurdle for someone to overcome X challenge that they might be dealing with is, do they even know that it's a challenge and that it exists, right? And so by recording themselves and seeing themselves, and they're able to have this dialogue, and you're there asking questions, I assume, to help prompt certain things to come to fruition, you're creating a genuine sense of self-awareness that cannot be defended. It's undeniable. It's everything is right there because it's you, and it's how you're showing up. And so I just think that's something that dawned on me as you were describing it, is I think that's probably the very first thing you're really creating in people is a true, genuine sense of self-awareness. And then that leads to improved self-confidence, the ability to show up authentically, and all of those things.
And I don't know.
So first of all, I've been writing down a whole list of questions. I've got about 20 of them here, but I'll drop to the one that I think is really fascinating. And that is when we talk about self-awareness, that lady you were talking about, and she said, look at my eyebrows. Now, what an incredible small piece of detail to become aware about. If I'd have challenged Cole and said, what do you think she's going to talk about? I bet you $100 it would not have been eyebrows.
No.
What we notice about ourselves, it says something about how we see the world, and that's what makes us special. And I really think when it comes down to it, something we try to do with everyone is to make them feel special, make them feel seen, but hopefully help them realize maybe something small, maybe something big that makes them special. Mm-hmm. And it may sound cliche, it may sound cheesy. It's like, that's what we do for kids. We're all kids. And in the professional world where stress is high and pressure is high, it's almost more important to remind people and let them feel seen for who they are and give them a chance.
No, I love it. I think it's fantastic. And I think what a unique opportunity to give people a space to grow themselves, which I think is perfect for our BrainWise friends. And I'm sure this will come up as we go along, but they can take the same premise of what is being described here. Obviously, they won't have you as the expert or your team there. And certainly we'll talk about how they can reach out to you if there's of interest for them. But if they are just sitting there, they want to practice showing up better and have more confidence or more presence or whatever it is, obviously recording ourselves and looking back and taking that moment to reflect gives them the opportunity to begin that journey for themselves. One of the things that I think is also a theme here that our BrainWise friends are probably hearing, and that I know I have heard from you specifically, Brian, is there's this idea of showing up on purpose instead of by default. So what does showing up on purpose look like in someone's body language, voice, or energy? Like, how will I know I or someone else is showing up on purpose?
This is me showing up on purpose.
Are you sure? I don't know. Was that authentic or?
It's when you think about just when people sit back and think about what does on purpose mean? Because then there's by default, there's by accident, right. You know? And I think that, can you show up as your truest self by default? That's up to the individual. And I think most of us need to click into that mode. And this is by design, but the name of the company is BetterOn. And it's not just on camera or on video, but it is the sense, your own individual physical, emotional sense of what does it mean to be on. And I think that being yourself on purpose refers to how that relates to another human being, where the on purpose part is not you alone, not me alone. The on purpose part is you're trying to reach someone intentionally. You're trying to connect to them, not just for the outcome you want, but you've got to put in a little bit more on your side to connect to that audience. And it could be your team, it could be a room full of people, it could be your spouse. We're talking about this whole thing, we're talking about the sense of self. The whole point of it is to show up better to other people.
And Phil, one of the things that just came across my mind is how does this connect to, we've talked a little bit about our multiple characters, and all of us have different characters that we might take with us when we go to certain settings. How is this work connected to that? If I identify those characters, and then now I can, obviously we talked about one of mine is the general, or you have the Iceman or whatever. Maybe it's intentionally not showing up as that particular character is also a part of this. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had there also.
Well, if I remember rightly, Ryan, one of the clients that you had gone through some of my multiple character workshop as well. And we had her record differently depending on which character it was.
Wow.
So.
Right. And that's so one way that, from the get-go, something that Phil taught me that we easily could leverage in what we do is, because I firmly believe in that, in the characters, that we all are not just one person. There's so much of us, and depending on the moment or who we're trying to connect with, different parts of us may show up. Mm-hmm. But a sense of who that is, and then gaining access to those people, I think is something that the camera and video can really help accelerate.
And so I've got a question for you, which I don't think is that we talked about before. So just a heads up there. And that is, have you noticed any pattern or differences in how people who are extrovert take to this process versus introvert?
Interesting.
There's a lot I can report back on there. Something that I've found firsthand is that introverts really gain a lot from the work. Introverts come in with some introverts, with maybe an assumption of what they think it's going to be. And I think a lot of people, I could talk for hours on the actual mechanics of what it is, but until somebody does this record, reflect, repeat, they're not going to get it. So just know that I can talk about it all day. But I found that introverts gain a lot because the camera to them can be just one person. And when they can channel their thoughts or their emotions or their energy through that lens, and there's exponential results when you watch, that it invigorates them instead of draining them. I'm not an expert on this. I've just heard from a lot of them where they leave this work energized, where some people crawl away, where they still get a lot, but it's so emotionally exhausting what we do with some people, depending on where they are. But I found that surprisingly, introverts tend to get a lot from it.
I wonder if some of that's related to, and this is just my own hypothesis, but in my experience, they tend to be a bit more observant too. I think it comes with the territory. And if that's the case, they're probably seeing more and taking more in, I would assume. I know for myself, I have to, because I am pretty naturally extroverted most of the time. So I'm moving a bazillion miles an hour, always in spaces with other people. I'm not as observant. It's just a fact. But I have to remind myself to be more observant. So I would imagine for those who tend to be more introverted, they probably see more on the onset of going through an exercise like this just because of their natural tendency to be more observant. And that certainly isn't indicative, I'm sure, of all introverts and extroverts, but I think is probably a fairly common thing. Very interesting. And one of the things I'd like to do, because I know I don't want to take up all of your day, Ryan. I know we only had till 12 scheduled today, but I would like to, you've talked a lot about confidence, self-awareness, showing up on purpose, and kind of what you do. How would someone who's listening to this podcast today be able to do everything, obviously, that you are helping your clients with, but can you give them one takeaway or one nugget of how they might be able to apply a part or a piece of this in their own life if they're wanting to build self-confidence, awareness, whatever it might be?
I would suggest people build in 5 minutes a day. And I'm sure there are apps that do this, but 5 minutes a day, and even start with audio. You don't have to do video. Start with recording yourself and listening to yourself. Start with recording yourself on video and watching yourself for 5 minutes. And expect to suffer. Expect it to not feel good. And go in that direction. And maybe break through it. And even if you don't, I just think that you will learn something. Mm-hmm. Will you get more confident? Maybe. I just think that the self-awareness piece in that case precedes the confidence. And in a lot of ways, it's maybe more important. I think we could all use a little bit more self-awareness. So I think that I would just say that the most common thing I hear from anybody is, I hate how I sound. I hate how I look. Like, everyone has this behavioral trigger to tell us that. So we know it. We know. So accepting that, let's just say that's universally true for anybody listening. So if you can accept that, what would happen if you still did it anyway? And let me know, because I'm curious. I want to know what happens.
Right. And I think one of the other things too that I am, if someone goes through that type of exercise or that activity, is extend yourself a little bit of grace, because everyone is starting at a different point. You may not be on camera all the time, and it may not be something that you've done before, but extend yourself a little bit of grace because you're at least getting started. And here's the other part. Perfection is entirely subjective to the person who's watching it. And we're always bigger self-critics of ourselves. Being able to exercise grace for ourselves in those moments is probably going to be a key aspect. So that way there isn't this visceral response every time you listen and watch yourself.
And I think it picks up on a couple of the things we've said to people in our various podcasts. And that is, don't set yourself up a target of you doing this amount. Do this amount. You said 5 minutes. I'd even suggest just take 2 minutes to start with, because that's not too hard. And chunking it down into manageable pieces, I think, is another message. And we're seeing that. I'm starting to see that as a set of themes in all of our podcasts. Mm-hmm. Start small.
Yeah.
And set the bar with just see yourself. It's not what you say. People don't remember what you say. It's how you make them feel. Mm-hmm. And this is not about what we're talking about for the listeners. This is not about other people. This is about you. And I also want to include here that people may be like, oh, this is professional skills, or this is going to help me in my life and my career. The one thing across the board that I should have mentioned with the pattern I see, this takes courage. So if you're just living your life, if you're just like, I'm going along, and for whatever reason, this interests you, this is not just like a tick the box. This would probably be the most courageous thing you do in a day. So if that interests you, get out of bed, record yourself, and watch it, and be like, man, that hurt to watch it. But know that from all of us, especially me, I admire you for being courageous.
And I think one of the other things we talk a lot about, Ryan, is that even the person and the way that we show up at work isn't always entirely separate from how we show up at home and how we show up with our friends. There's a lot of parallels and there's a lot of intersection things that cross over. And so this type of work, I believe, universally could help you improve in any area, whether it's at work, professionally, or personally, you might be struggling. Maybe a part 2 of this conversation that I think is really fascinating is we're seeing ourselves, and there's such a visceral response at first to how we are showing up. think about how the other person who's watching this in the future, how they're showing, not that they're watching it, but they're experiencing us. What's their response? Sometimes they're not going to see our flaws, but especially a space of empathy or showing up in a way that I'm being really intentional about time with others. If you're hearing feedback that is contrary to that, how are they experiencing you if you're experiencing yourself in such a visceral way? So, anyways, I just think that's really fascinating and another space to uncover as we go along this journey. But
You said you started this in 2013. And so
Yeah.
you've been doing it for coming up to 12, 13 years. And you've seen lots of people go through learnings and changes and different experiences. What's changed you during that period of time?
Phil coming in late with the heavy hitters here, huh? I think what's changed in me is the commitment to it, meaning that what started as a belief and a vision and a dream really is still that, but to keep going and continue looking in this cavern and try to make a healthy business out of it requires you to evolve. I think I've had to basically what's changed is me staying the same, if that makes sense. So I've had to realize that I can keep it going. I can keep the belief going because it's true to me. What we do and what we see, all this stuff we're talking about feels true to me, which is like nourishment. And that doesn't necessarily answer what has changed in me, but I think what has changed is that there's more of a need. There's more of an appetite. I don't know if we are going to be able to have the solution for everyone, but we can at least talk about it, and I can at least illuminate back what we learn from the companies and the people we work with to hopefully give someone a bit more confidence.
I think it's perfect takeaways and learnings. And so if someone was interested in getting in contact with you, how would they go about doing that?
BetterOn.com is a great place to start. Ryan at BetterOn is my email. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And if anybody's curious, or even just wants to talk more about what we're talking about here and a little bit of the science behind this and why we do it, I'm happy to chat with anybody.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being a guest on our podcast. I think we just signed you up for episode 2 of your guest segment, by the way, as a part of our dialogue. So stay tuned. And thank you so much for joining. What a great conversation we had today between Ryan, Phil, and myself, exploring how do we show up authentically as who we are and how Ryan does that through his organization called BetterOn. It was a really fascinating subject, and I think as you listen to it, if you apply some of the neuroscience and behavioral science principles that we've talked about over the last number of episodes, you'll begin to see some of those things formulate or populate as a part of the conversation. And I highly encourage you to go and do some of those recorded activities that we talked about with Ryan to help yourself begin to go on the journey of where you might want to see yourself improve. So thank you for always tuning in and listening to our episodes. We are so appreciative of all of our BrainWise friends. If you enjoyed our conversation today, like, comment, share, subscribe, rate, and review. Most importantly, share this podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues so that they too can live a BrainWise journey. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay BrainWise.